Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today we're going to be talking about rimlock as it pertains to the Mosin Nagant rifle. Now I know we've already had a few videos on this topic, but I wanted to make a follow-up video to help clarify some errors in one of my previous videos where I was using some absolute universal statements. And also, I just wanted to have a quick refresher on rimlock for a lot of our new viewers. So first of all, I'm going to set this guy aside here for a second, and we're going to talk about what rimlock is. Some of you may have heard this before. Rimlock simply occurs when you are trying to feed a cartridge into the chamber, and then, you're going to close the bolt on it, and then you're going to fire that cartridge. Rimlock occurs when you're trying to do that, but you can't because the cartridge directly below it, this would be the cartridge in the magazine, gets actually caught in front of the rim of the case you're trying to feed, which would be this guy. See that? Now this only happens really when you're using rifles with rimmed cartridges. Now of course the Mosin Nagant uses the 7.62x54 rimmed projectile. And these are some steel case Tula rounds we're looking at here. But you can see that the rim is nice if you have something like a machine gun where you have to have a claw that can extract those rims from the belt really easily. That's good, but it's not so good when you're trying to feed these rascals from a magazine from a rifle like our Mosin here. So the question is, does the Mosin Nagant get rimlock? Well, the answer is no asterisk, okay? So generally speaking, Mosins don't get rimlock, and I'm going to show you why, first of all. So again, we're going to set this guy to the side here, and then we're going to get a bit of a different kind of Mosin. This is one without a stock. This was actually just, this is a normal 9130 rifle we're looking at here, but we need to remove the stock so I can actually show you what's going on here. Mosins get around the problem of rimlock because of this little device called the interrupter. Now you may have seen this guy before. There's this long bar here, and it's connected to the receiver via a dovetail right here, and then it's screwed into place. So it's secured via a dovetail and a screw. Pretty cool. You'll notice here this guy's spring-loaded. Now why does this need to be spring-loaded? Well, the interrupter, what it does is it actually prevents the cartridge directly below the one you're trying to feed, which is this guy, from being too high, right? So the issue is if it's close enough to the cartridge you're trying to feed, the cartridge you're trying to feed can get caught behind the rim of the one below it. But if this cartridge is low enough, you're not going to have any issues feeding this guy. And then once you get rid of that one, the next one comes up. The one below that one, if it's low enough, right? The rims are separated enough if they're not touching, well, you're not going to have to worry about rim lock, right? And generally speaking, this works pretty well on Mosins. So safely, if you're ever at the range, pointed in a safe direction, acting very safely, you can try to do this where you put a round into the magazine, right, of your Mosin, and then just for kicks, try to load that round as far up this way as you possibly can. And then when you load it, you got to make sure it gets below the interrupter, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to put another round in. So it'll get below the interrupter, and then from there, try loading another round. And as far back as you possibly can, trying to actually get rimlock, right? So trying to make it so where the next round you load is way behind here as much as you possibly can. And then what you'll notice is it's probably going to load just fine, and that's because you have this interrupter here keeping that next round in the magazine low enough, right? This is a really interesting design. Now it's spring-loaded because you actually have to deactivate this. And you'll notice here what's really fancy is you can deactivate the interrupter. So you can see the interrupter right here looking down by pressing on this little bar on the inside. See that? That's because this bar is interconnected. It's actually a two-piece design. And what happens is when you close the bolt, there's a groove cut out of the bolt such that it goes along here, and when the bolt is not in battery, it doesn't impose any force on the interrupter, and it stays where it is. But as soon as you put the bolt in battery, it actually imposes a force inside the receiver here and disengages the interrupter enough to where the next cartridge can pop up out of the magazine. So that's actually how it works, and it's a really clever design. And this is generally why Mosins don't get rimlock, is because you have this really cool thing called the interrupter. Very cool. Now, there's an asterisk here, and that's because I still see reports of people getting rimlock on Mosins sometimes. Now, rimlock is not something I typically experience on a Mosin. I have hardly ever, if even ever, have actually experienced it for myself, but that's not to say that it never ever happens, right? Nobody can make a universal statement like that because there's just millions of Mosins that were made. So that's one way I put it like that. I have seen other people state that they have seen rimlock, so I tend to believe them. The other reason I tend to believe them, though, is because Finland, y'all have heard of Finnish Mosins probably. Finland, with their abundance of Mosins in the 1930s and 1940s, actually made a separate modification to the Mosin Nagants that probably was also to help alleviate weird cases where rimlock could occur. Let's take a look at that. This is a Finnish Mosin Nagant modified anti-jam magazine. And we can tell it's an anti-jam magazine because it's had this little crimp done to the side of the magazine right here. You see that? We can also see it if we look on the inside by depressing the magazine. Kind of hard to see on camera, but it's right there. Now, what is this? Now, I've tried to read some literature on this, and my Finnish is not the best. I've read Finnish literature, so trying to do some translations, I'm probably not getting 100% of Finland's own literature on why they exactly did this. It seems, though, that one of the reasons they did this was to help prevent your rounds from being cattywampus, as we say here in America, in the magazine. Now, when I say cattywampus, let's take a look at a second here at the follower. Let me get my zoom right. We can see the follower here, which is this guy that I'm pressing. When it's lined up correctly, it's perpendicular to the magazine body. I guess parallel to the magazine body. See, it's kind of the same line there. But what happens, let me ask you this, if your round in the magazine or your follower is causing your round in the magazine to be cattywampus, like tilted one way, right? If it's tilted, that might be a bit of a problem. And one of my theories on this is if the round is too tilted, it can actually cause the rim to stick out, even if the interrupter's catching it, and then you can still catch on the rim that way. And it seems to me that one of the goals of having this modification done to magazines was to prevent rounds from actually being too tilted in a certain direction inside the magazine. Now, does it actually do anything else? Well, if I load the round in here, I mean, you can kind of feel it rubbing up, that crimp rubbing up against the round there a little bit. It kind of depends on how far up the round is. But it's a very interesting modification nonetheless, and it's something I wanted to bring up because it appears that Finland probably also experienced rimlock because they made this modification. That was probably one of, if not the main goals in making such a modification. And again, Mosins are interesting because there's, in theory and in reality. Okay, in theory, this is a good design. In reality, we have to understand that there's a lot of differences in tolerances between each Mosin, and some parts may work well in certain Mosins, and other parts, might work okay in other Mosins. So, for those of you who actually are still experiencing rimlock on your Mosin Nagant, how do you fix it? Or can it be fixed? Well, that's a great question. The first thing I would try if I was experiencing rim lock would be to actually just, first of all, I would probably swap out the bottom of the magazine floor plate, which is like the whole follower assembly, like this. And I would try that first. If you have another one that you can try, because it's really easy, you just pull this guy out and it's just drop in, put in another one. And then I would try another one and see if that does anything. If so, it could be something with that particular follower geometry was a little bit messed up. If you're still seeing issues, the next thing I would try is I would replace the interrupter, because it might be possible that your interrupter geometry is not quite right. And if it's not quite right, it can cause some problems. And also, on these two-piece designs, it's also worth it to swap out the other piece as well. Sometimes on earlier Mosins, you'll have a one-piece design where this whole thing is just one piece, and then you just swap out that whole part. If that still doesn't fix your interrupter, or your rim lock problem, excuse me, then what I would do is I would swap out the entire magazine body. And again, none of this is really that difficult. To swap out the magazine body, you don't even have to take the rifle out of the stock. You just have to take out the bottom and the top action screws of your rifle. You can leave your rifle in the stock. You just pull out this whole assembly, put a new one in, put the two screws back in, and you're good to go. So those are some different things I would try. And if you are experiencing rim lock issues, go try that and then let me know your results so I can help relay that feedback to our larger audience. Because again, I don't have any Mosins that I know of that I've experienced that do have a rim lock issue, but it's something I will be aware of and keep my eye out for. And if I do, I think it'd be worth making a video where we could do some debugging on the fly to see what the issue is or what the fix for that may be. But generally speaking, if you're worried about rim lock on a Mosin, I wouldn't be worried about it until you actually have the rifle in your hand and you're loading it and it fails to load because of rim lock. Again, I haven't experienced it, so this is only like a relatively minor concern, in my opinion. Some Mosins probably will have a rim lock issue. Most, in my opinion, will not, because this generally is a very good design. So hopefully, guys, this clears up some rim lock questions you had without being too long-winded. If you guys have any more questions on this, or if you'd like me to make a follow-up video, let me know. You can send me an email. I put my email down in the description of every video. Please consider subscribing if you like more Mosin Nagant content like this. Let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.